excited you could be here. Look, as entrepreneurs, we build businesses, and ultimately a lot of our goal is to be able to do something when we're done, right? We want to exit, we want to sell, we want to go public, we want to have somebody else run it. But the bottom line is a lot of us are going to eventually exit. And when we do, we need to make sure that we maximize return. 100% of my friends that have sold businesses have sold it for less than they should have, admittingly from them, because they didn't know how to be able to exit and be able to maximize their return. We're going to fix that. We're going to make sure that doesn't happen to you. And to prevent that, we've got two experts joining us today. So as an early employee of Apple and head of innovation at Redbox, Mark Ackler has been creating and investing in tech startups since 1986. Now, today, he's a founding partner of Math Venture Partners, a technology venture capital fund, and an adjunct professor at Northwestern Kellogg School of Management as well. Now, Mert Iseri has the founder of SwipeSense, a health tech company acquired by SC Johnson in 2020. He also co-founded Design of America using design thinking for social impact, which won the National Design Award in 2018. Now, together, they wrote Exit Right to be the definitive guide on exits, delivering the best possible results for you and your company. Our Ribe Inc. was co-founded by Igor Fedenkov, a serial entrepreneur with a decade-long history of creating successful startups in the healthcare and hospitality verticals, improving brand angle and revenue 10x. So anyways, guys, thanks for joining us today. You guys are really impressive. I'm really excited that you're here.
We're so excited. Ty, thanks. We've been looking forward to this conversation. We really appreciate the opportunity to talk with you and your audience.
Yeah, and we're glad that you're here because I think that this is the biggest problem that I see that entrepreneurs have that they don't even know they have. Is they build businesses, they don't even think about exiting and setting up their business for success. And then when they do go to sell, so many are so disappointed in what they actually are able to get out of it. So, I mean, this has to be a big problem that you guys see on a regular basis as well.
You know, it is. And I've been very fortunate. I've been an entrepreneur four times. I started 4 different businesses and sold them. And as a VC, I've sat on dozens of boards. And I've gone through a lot of different transactions. And we realized that there's no real source of wisdom. There's no great place to go for helping entrepreneurs through this, as you talked about earlier, this perilous journey. And that's how this book got started. And it's got started with Mert's journey. So Mert, you want to talk about that?
Absolutely. I ran a company called SwipeSense, as you mentioned, and, we've had a wonderful journey as a company. We raised venture capital. We built a healthcare technology solution that scaled up to dozens of hospitals across the country. And, just like any, happy ending to a good startup story, we were acquired in March of 2020. Now, that's what the story looks like from the outside, but from the inside, it was a difficult transaction. There were a lot of tense moments along the way. I hadn't sold a company before. This isn't something that entrepreneurs get to do many, many times over. Even you take something like fundraising, which is rare, raising tens of millions of dollars for a startup is rare. But while you're doing that, you get a lot of tries, you get a lot of takes. You pitch to a lot of venture funds, you get said no, you refine and improve along the way. Selling companies not like that. You have a couple of opportunities, maybe a handful of companies that are interested in buying you. So the price of a mistake is really, really high. The deal did close. So, regardless of how tense the situation was, we did get to a good outcome. We were happy. But, when the deal closed, I was very bitter. I was sitting down with Mark. Mark was on my sort of brain trust at the time of just like folks that really helped guide me, mentor me, and sort of did it in a very, very selfless way. After the deal, we were sitting down grabbing coffee, and I was telling him, rah, 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 rah. Just like, oh, we could have done this. I should have known that. Why didn't I do it this way? Like, I wish I could go back in time. We could have driven more value. And Mark had profound advice for me, which was, look, first of all, this isn't a good way to start a new relationship. Like the water under the bridge, deal is closed. Now there's a new future. This should be a bright moment. This should be a good thing. Secondarily, while it's fresh in your mind, you should write this down. With 2 goals. One is the, spirit towards helping the acquiring company. At some point, if they come to you for advice around how to do a different job with the next acquisition, you should have some real examples in your hand of how you think the process could have been better. But it's also to pay it forward. There's a lot of founders who also struggle with acquisitions, and, you can help them out.
I love that, Mert. And, that brings me to kind of the end itself is that, when I go to these conferences with these guys that are ultimately there to get me to sell my business, right? They show up all the fancy numbers and they say, then now is the time to sell. And if you don't sell now, you're going to get a small smidgen of what you should. Is that true? I mean, what is the right time to sell the business? I mean, outside of when the business owner is ready to sell, like, is there a time that we should be focusing on in a window based on the economy and other factors that we can sell and get maximum value?
We call this moment the local maximum in a particular journey of a business. Now, it's a very, very, very specific moment. It's different for every company. I mean, first of all, I want to echo what you said. If the founder wants to sell, if you're burnt out, if you want to quit, there's no other determining factor other than that. Like, ultimately, it's about you. It's about your family. It's about your life. However, assuming that you still want to keep going, the answer to the question, when is the right moment to sell, can be explained in the following manner. If you essentially have a business where you look out into the horizon and you see mountains to climb, there are challenges ahead. Maybe competition is heating up. Maybe sales is flatlining, or you need to invest more in sales in order to juice up the numbers. Maybe there's product challenges where technology is becoming outdated and they have to build a new version. Whatever the challenge is, down the road, you see you're going to need more resources. In that moment, every founder should ask themselves, is it a good idea to go out, get more resources, either as a form of an investment, more customers, further investment in the company, or is this a moment where that future resource can come from a strategic partner? Maybe there's a strategic hole we can plug as part of our technology that sort of allows us to enable that future value and overcome those challenges working closely with a partner. Now, this is the definition of what makes the right moment. But stapled to that, you should also have a very concrete reason of why the acquiring company should care about this. Fundamentally, it's not about you. It's about them. Do you have a solution that solves a greater problem for the acquiring company? Do you have something that rights or wrongs to their business? So it's an exercise in empathy. It's about you understanding what you can do for the acquiring company and having a concrete data point in order to justify that answer. Mark, what are your thoughts?
And I'll anchor that. So one of the things entrepreneurs don't really understand, if they haven't gone through this before, when there's a transaction, there's something called a waterfall distribution, which is basically you're selling your company for X. Okay, which classes of shareholders get what? And so the debt, you pay off your debt, and then you have preferred. If you've raised money, you have preferred shareholders. Then you have common shareholders. There's different classes of preferred shareholders. At the end of the day, what are the common shares worth? And if you decide to keep on going and you have to raise another round and you have to raise, what that does is that pushes the bar, because your new investors, they're going to want a return on their investment, which means it's going to take you several more years. You're going to be diluted with this new round of capital. And it may make sense for you to not take funding right now and actually sell the business from a personal wealth maximization perspective. So we're talking about technology businesses right now, particularly if you've had investors. It's a different calculus if there's no investors. But if you have investors and you have to raise more money, that's a challenge. But let me flip this around a little bit. One of the things that we did is we created a framework that we call FAIR: fit, alignment, integration, and rationale. And let's talk a little bit about this framework, because the way your question is, when's the right time to sell? But a little bit more nuanced question might be, how do you maximize value? And one of the ways that we talk about in the book about maximizing value is through this lens of the FAIR framework. And Mert, you want to talk us through that?
Absolutely. FAIR stands for fit, alignment, integration, and rationale. If you have all four of these elements, you likely have the right partner who's willing to pay the most, maximize the value, but also ensures the long-term success of your vision, of your dream, of your startup, of your people, of your customers. So each of these elements we can dig into. Fit is cultural fit. Do you admire this brand? Do you admire the way they treat their people? Do you admire the way they treat their customers? Can you sit next to the person whom you're eventually going to work for and, spend a 4-hour flight and not want to kill each other in the end? Is there cultural alignment? Are decisions being made when there are no written down rules in a way in which you would be in agreement with? This is so hard to quantify. And yet without this, the rest kind of doesn't matter. Alignment is whether you're aligned both internally with your stakeholders, your board, your team, your customers, your family, your stakeholders, as well as the acquiring company stakeholders, the CEO of the acquiring company, the head of product, the head of finance. Are we all looking in the same direction in terms of where we want to go as a result of this acquisition? Third is the plan of integration. How are these companies coming together? Are we going to overlap in HR? Are we going to share sales resources? Is the technology need to be overlapped and coordinated? But what's the plan of actually capturing this value? And that brings me to the final point, the rationale. Can I explain this to my grandmother, why 1 + 1 = 100? There should be a very straightforward, very obvious reason why companies for joining forces creates an outsized amount of value that benefits both sides. And if you have all four of these elements, fit, alignment, integration, and rationale, you found the right partner that can be the best home for your startup. And as a result of that, you'll also maximize your earning and maximize your impact as well.
I love that you guys created this framework because I think it makes it really simple and it's easy too. It's not like, 100 things we have to remember. So part of this actually comes with, I think, finding the right exit partner. And so what does that look like? If I'm now building my business, I know I'm going to exit, I know I'm going to sell. And one of the questions I come again is who I sell to. I don't know. I mean, I'm going to say private equity, right? That sounds really good. Although I don't know if that's the case or not. So when I'm building the business, should I be keeping things in mind now about who a potential exit partner will be? And if I am, does that actually affect how I'm going through and the actions I'm taking to build the business?
Yeah, that's such a wonderful question. And before we answer that, one step back is we have this concept of an annual exit talk. And what we mean by that is the concept of an exit is kind of a taboo subject that many CEOs are afraid to bring up to their board, to their investors or their boards of directors. And we happen to think that the best board meetings are strategic in conversation, not tactical, not reporting. And part of that strategic conversation we think should be a conversation about an exit. And we have this concept of a once a year annual exit talk, call it the first board meeting of the year, where the CEO, it's planned, everybody knows it's coming, there's no stigma attached to it. The CEO is free to talk about how's the business going? Are we still growing? Are we still grabbing market share? Is our technology still hot? Are things starting to slow down? Do we start feeling competition? Like, when is the right time to sell? Are we, not today, maybe 3 years from now. But the importance of having an annual exit talk with your investors is you can build alignment. And by the way, the investors have a point of view too. So one of the things I tell all entrepreneurs is that when you take money from an investor, when you take other people's money, you're also taking our agenda. And our agenda is really straightforward. We want to make X return over Y timeframe. And the typical time horizon for a venture fund, 7 to 10 years. If it's a private equity fund, it might be 3 to 5 years. Depends on the stage of the company. So if you're in year one, if we make an investment in you and it's year one of our fund, it's like, yeah, go, grow, yeah, push the pedal down. But if it's year 10, well, the clock is ticking and our LPs want their money back. And so we're starting to feel more pressure to have liquidations, have exits. So we think having this annual exit talk is great. And the one of the benefits of having an annual exit talk is it gives you the luxury not only of alignment, but of time. So we're going to talk, I'm going to answer your question. You asked about the types of different exits. If you have the luxury of time, and we can talk about, it could be, if you're a high flying company, you can have an IPO. Very few companies, like infinitesimal, actually get big enough to have an IPO. So then maybe it's a strategic buyer, or it could be, you mentioned private equity, it could be a financial buyer. What they care about are really different. And if you have the luxury of time, maybe you think it's a strategic buyer who cares about top line revenue. And if you have a couple of years to plan, well, then you can invest in sales, invest in marketing, juice up the numbers so you could show accelerated top line growth. If it's a private equity firm and maybe they care more about EBITDA and profitability. Well, if you have a little bit of time, you can turn the knobs and you can focus on profitability, maybe pare down some of your spending a little bit, get your house in order. You can also, if you have the luxury of time, you can make sure your data room is pristine and all your documents are up to date. Maybe you can focus on your intellectual property and make sure that all of your patent and trademarks and employment agreements that assign intellectual property rights to the company, that everything is signed. So we believe that an annual exit talk is a great strategic and an important strategic conversation that every single CEO should have. Now, Mert, I'll turn it over to you in terms of the types of exits.
Yeah, there's basically 4 categories that founders should be aware of. And it's important to know who you're selling to because each of these care about different key assets. You ultimately don't want to be optimizing for one and end up with a different kind of a buyer. You've just wasted a ton of energy and time. And frankly, people care about very, very different things. The first kind, which unfortunately is most exits, is a competitive sale. Maybe your competition is buying you, you've lost the battle, and your company is being sold for its pieces, its scraps, if you will. This can take a form of an acqui-hire. There's different names for this, but let's just suffice to say, you haven't maximized any value in the situation. This is sort of like a soft landing for the company. Second is a financial buyer. There's a private equity fund, venture fund. You're essentially selling the company, part or all of it, to the next investor. And their goal is to go ahead and sell it to the next person, essentially, by imbuing with a bit more value. The third kind is going public. It's very, very rare and difficult to do so. And frankly, if you're in a position to go public, go public. This is the best advice that we can give you.
Well, maybe. There are challenges to running a publicly traded company. So, but there's trade-offs. There's pros and cons.
Now, the fourth kind is a strategic buyer, which is where we really want to focus our efforts and energy into. And the strategic buyers all care about different key assets. If they care about your IP portfolio, as Mark said, it's really important to focus on those. If they care about a particular piece of technology that solves a specific problem for the acquirer, that's where the focus really needs to be. So depending on the result of the exit talk, by figuring out which kind of a buyer we're selling into, there's very specific activities that founders can do to build that ecosystem of buyers, go out there, network their way into the right buyers, meet them years in advance to establish trust, establish credibility, but also shape their company, not as sort of like putting lipstick in the last minute, but really strategically adjusting certain things that yield results in 1, 2, 3 years in order for the results to be there when the moment is right.
Yeah, and let me add to that. There's 2 things, Mert, you touched on that are so important. One is trust. Trust is the lubrication. All deals have moments where they are on the precipice where they can fall apart. Trust is the lubrication that gets deals done and concluded. And the only way you build trust is over time. And so we are big believers in establishing relationships months, years before you're ready. And Mert's very good at talking about those relationships. The other goes back to rationale. So the Jedi mind trick is if you can build a rationale, if you understand the strategic buyer so well, you understand their business and their needs and what do they care about, their financial levers, and you could plug a hole for them. And you can get the strategic buyer to articulate the value of your company, your product, your customer base levered into them. That's how you maximize value. So Mert, why don't you talk about both of those things?
Well, let's put a pin on this because I want to ping pong this back to Ty. I feel like we're so excited about this conversation. We're going back and forth. But Ty, I'd love to turn it back over to you. If this is an area you want to dig into, if there's anything else you want to touch on.
I love that. And first of all, I apologize for my duck ring. My kids are the only ones that have breakthrough mode on my phone to ever make it ring, and they're out running the city. So anyway, so I apologize for that breakthrough. And that being said, I love what you're saying, but here's my confusion: is that it's easier to be able to build the enterprise value per se if I understand who the buyer is, but I don't know who the buyer is, and I don't know that buyer. I don't think I will know the buyer or know the path until I get closer to exit. So my question is that as a founder and somebody that's building a business, how do I optimize the company overall for multiple potential paths? Because I don't think I'm going to know who's the buyer will really be until I get closer to the sell or start a sale process. I'm not ready for that. I'm nowhere close to that. So what should I be thinking about now, building the business, preparing to get maximum value when I exit, and not just maximum value as money in my pocket, but maximum value of the company to the potential buyer where it can continue on when I don't really know that. And I don't know if I'll know that. Like, for example, when I look at these four, I don't think I'll do IPO. I don't have any competitors who are way smaller than I am in my space. So then a strategic buyer makes the most sense, but I don't know. So if I don't know, what can I be doing now long-term to maximize the value for when that day comes?
You should ask yourself the question that a founder should honestly be asking themselves every day, this question: how do I provide more value to my customers? I think the core of this answer is hidden in that fundamental question, because the best acquisition partner is someone that cares about your customers as much as you do, that cares about creating value for your customers as much as you do. Now, this might take on a couple of different forms. Maybe there's an established brand with an integrated product in your space that you're coming in to disrupt. You have a newer version, a shinier version, a faster version, a better version. This is the age-old story of capitalism, and coming in, the incumbents get replaced by the new ones. But there's got to be something better that you're doing that no one else is doing. That's the reason why your company exists in the first place. But the folks who are there before you, the competition that you're disrupting, maybe they can be your collaborators. Maybe there's a channel partnership there that you can start investing in. Maybe there's a product that you can co-develop. There is a hole that you can plug that ultimately serves your customers the more. And once you frame the question as sort of how do I help my customers the most, suddenly names emerge. Again, these might not end all be all acquirers, but these are the clues. These are the things that founders should start digging into little by little, networking their way into the leadership, understanding their product roadmap better. Now, these are different universes. You're a startup, you're a small business. These might be giant public companies that are, 50 plus years old. This actually works to your advantage, because the bigger the company is, the more public their strategy is. I mean, literally, if they are a public company, there is a quarterly call where the analysts are asking tough questions to the CEO. There's an annual report that gets published out that literally says to their shareholders, this is what we want to do in the next 5 years. That is the job of a public company, to put that data out there. It's your job as the founder to dig in and do your homework. Because ultimately, as we keep repeating, this isn't about you. This is about them. This is about their priorities. And there just happens to be some shared customers in here and some shared value that you can co-invest in.
Yeah, and I'm going to comment on that. So first of all, on empathy, we have 3 rules of empathy, which is it's not about you. It's always about the person sitting across the table from you. Do your homework, which is what Mert just said, like really, truly, deeply understand that company. And bring a gift. And what we mean by that is add value. And so be a thought leader. And I'll give you an example. My first company, this is many years ago, we had a development tools company with a programming language. And I went and I knew all the other companies who had programming languages, Microsoft and Symantec and a whole bunch of other companies. And I became friends with the CEOs of those companies. And I made it a point to, even though they were much larger than my company, I made it a point to visit with them once or twice a year. And not that we were equals, but as a thought leader, always trying to give them a few, nothing that was no trade secrets, but just sharing information and building relationships and building trust. And when it was time to sell my first business, it was easy. I picked up the phone and called the CEO, in my case, it was the CEO of Symantec, who I knew for several years. And I just said, it's time. I was like, great. Like we were friends. We were known entities. Like we knew who we were, and there was fundamental trust. And I understood his business, and I could articulate so clearly the value of plugging in our product into their sales and customer base. And by the way, the advantage of a larger company is two things. The first is they have a brand that people know and trust. And most importantly, they have sales. They have a distribution methodology. And so that is huge leverage. That's a gigantic advantage that startups don't have. And so you just build those relationships ahead of time.
One of the things you guys talk about is a buyer ecosystem. Can you give me some more insight on that?
Yeah, think of it as a network of folks that you're keeping in your back pocket that you have this trusted relationship with. Now, when we say buyer, because this is literally like a spreadsheet of customers, these are relationships that you should cultivate. We're not just saying, hey, just know in a Google Doc somewhere, we're like, oh, one day Microsoft can buy me. No, we're saying that have a real relationship with someone who runs a division of Microsoft, who overlaps with your customers. We have a real trusted relationship with that you've been adding value over the years. And they're at the other end of the phone when you pick up and decide to call. You don't build a network when you need it. You build it way before. And this is what we're trying to sort of accomplish by here. And you want to have multiple of these folks. Ultimately, there's an age-old saying in here. It's partially true, but it bears repeating in here. If you're one buyer, you have no buyer. There needs to be multiple people interested in this for it to be the maximal potential value in here. Now, we're not saying go out there and run an auction, but there needs to be multiple folks who realize the value in the company for there ultimately to be this maximal exit.
Yeah, and think about it this way. In our world, which is more the software technology world, entrepreneurs spend a lot of time fundraising. If the journey is a 10-year journey and they're raising money every 18 months and it takes 6 months to do a round, if you look at it across 10 years, they're spending an inordinate amount of their time fundraising. Why in the world would you only spend weeks or months when it's time to maximize value and exit? Like, we think you should be investing as much time as you are in fundraising, as you are in thinking through, preparing for, and building the relationships appropriate so that when you are ready, the skids are greased.
Tell me a little bit about the book. I know why you guys wrote it. Where can we get it? What can we expect to get in it? Who should be reading this book?
I'll take a stab at this. So first of all, Exit Right, easy to find. Go to your favorite bookstore, Barnes & Noble, go to Amazon, you'll get your hands on it. And, the spirit in which we wrote it was really to give back, is to help. And I got to say, it's been, we launched the book in mid-February. And so give or take, it's been 5-6 months. Boy, we have some exciting stories that folks have been reaching out and writing to us with. Well, number one, we're getting messages of gratitude from founders who've started thinking about something that they really have never thought about before, incorporating the exit talk and having real conversations with their board. I mean, this is ultimately about making something that's a core component of the startup, of the business journey, and making that real visible. Even if you're not going to sell right now, it's to start getting the wheels turning about this eventual moments. That's so very important. This is why we're here. This is why your investors are around the table. But we're also getting some concrete stories of folks who've actually negotiated way better deals, way better outcomes for themselves. Now, a lot of this stuff is confidential. We can't tell you who they are. Folks have reached out to us in confidence and actually exchanged back and forth. We've helped them with some advice. And there are these lovely moments where someone will ask us a direct question about a particular, moment. It's like, hey, I have this deal. It's worth, I'm being offered 18 million right now. There are these negotiating points. We just say, okay, pull up chapter 7. You're looking for this paragraph. This is how you should redline. And we're sort of their little shadow advisors, if you will. And real movement in these deals. $18 million turns into a $26 million deal. $15 million turns into a $40 million deal. It's not bad for a book that's $24.99. That it puts a couple $1 million in your pocket as a result of this. But the reality is exits are like that. A small improvement in the exit literally means millions of dollars in your pocket. These are high value moments. They don't happen every day when you're trying to sell your company. So it's just the greatest joy in our hearts when we are on the receiving end of a genuine thank you, of knowing that we moved the needle for some of these founders. That's really all that we could ask for and beyond.
And I also want to give a shout out to UBS. UBS has been our sponsor, and they have been a phenomenal partner. They've been a great thought leader, and they've introduced us to their financial advisor network and to all of their customers. And it's been a really, really important partnership for us. And books don't typically have sponsors, so it's been a really interesting relationship.
Guys, I really appreciate you coming on. I already have your book pulled up. As soon as we're done here, I'm going to make sure that I get this thing purchased, because there's just so much value here. And like I said, I you guys have come from this experience too. I've just never found anybody who's ever exited and not made significant mistakes that cost them millions, if not tens of millions of dollars. And you guys really have simplified a way of being able to understand what needs to be understood in the process of building the business, to be able to exit the right way. And I think it's interesting because you talked about things I've just never heard before. And I think it makes a lot of sense to really understand, to know who your potential buyer is, to have that kept in mind, and actually, go through this thought process of who might be the best fit. And I really loved so much, especially Mark, talking about how you're really building these relationships beforehand and how easy it is when you have the right relationship. Because from the talk that we hear, it's about an auction. It's about all these crazy things and we don't know, right? But what you say makes sense. I'd rather sell it to a friend that I know, like, and trust than have it go through anywhere else, because it's my baby, right? As an entrepreneur, that's how we see it.
Well, it goes both ways too, because we also, as part of this book, we talked to heads of corp dev at Apple and Facebook and Google and Microsoft and Amazon and a lot of the large tech companies, Atlassian and Snowflake. And one of the consistent themes from them, from their point of view, from the buyer's point of view, is they like to buy companies from people they know, that people they trust. So it's bi-directional. It goes both ways.
And ultimately, it's about your legacy. Like the question is, will your investors invest in your next startup? Will your employees work for your next company? Will the buyers buy the next company from you? So this isn't just about passing on the hot potato to someone and saying good luck. It's about creating real value that goes the distance. So our hope is that Exit Right leads to startup exits that truly find their right home, and it creates more impact for everyone. It becomes a non-zero sum game.
Yeah, well, I love that. The top of Exit Right, it's how to sell your startup, maximize your return, and build your legacy. And it's that legacy important that I think is so important, because somebody that puts in what we put in as founders, like, the money's one thing, but we want to see it live on well beyond the time that we pass it off to somebody else, because we are so attached to our customers. We are so attached to our employees. And I think I speak for a lot of us, that's well more important than money. I can easily make more money, but to disappoint them is like an emotional thing to me. So I love the perception that you guys have on both the buyer and the seller side.
Yeah. And one last thing too, this book isn't just for people who are about to sell their company. The decisions you make at the beginning of your journey about equity and who you partner with and how you structure the business have an outsized impact at the end of your journey. And so there's also thoughts and really important information in the book when you're just starting out, and understanding those decisions that you're making in the beginning. Boy, they really come back and bite you at the end if you make the wrong decisions.
I love it, guys. Besides getting Exit Right on Amazon, which I am going to put the link in the show resources, where can everybody else go to learn more from you guys?
Well, Mark and I actually are launching an online course in the month of August. So this is hot off the press. This is the first place where we're really truly announcing it publicly. But we want to be working closely with CEOs who really want to dive into the concepts of the book and learn from the folks that we've interviewed and worked with directly. So keep us in your network. We're on Twitter at MHI, as well as on LinkedIn. Both Mark and I are very, very active on LinkedIn there. Start following us, start engaging with some of the content that we're putting out there about some of the nuggets that we've created in the book. But ultimately, a lot of these things that we've talked about at the surface level really deserve a deep dive. And it especially as it pertains to applying it to your specific company and your specific situation. And the goal here is to really arm you in a situation where the playing field is really not level. The companies that are buying you buy companies like that for breakfast. They'll do 3 or 4 acquisitions per month. And you as the entrepreneur, if there's a Mount Rushmore of entrepreneurs, maybe you sell 5-6 companies in your lifetime, in your career. So the goal here is to really to empower the founders and level this playing field for better outcomes. So we encourage you to check us out on LinkedIn and Twitter and follow along. And if you want to dig deeper into these concepts, reach out and we'll make sure that we save a spot for you in our course.
I love it. Mark, thank you guys so much for coming on with us today.
Ty, this was
Our
great.
pleasure.
Thank you so much.
All right, listen,
Thank
if you're
you.
watching or listening to this, this is so valuable. Like I said, I mean, we put so much into growing a business. And the reality is that if you're not thinking about exit and doing the right things from the beginning, you literally can spend most of your professional life working for something and being very disappointed in the result you get, or the opposite. If you come in and have the foresight to understand what these guys are talking about from the beginning and keep these things like the end in mind from the beginning and build your business the right way, taking into account the principles that these guys are actually teaching in Exit Right, then it's just so much more rewarding. It takes better care of your customers, your employees, the baby that you built is taken care of, as well as, exactly what they're saying right here on the book. You're ultimately also maximizing your return as well. So you need to go get Exit Right. I'm getting Exit Right. I think this is phenomenal. I hear from a lot of people that talk about selling businesses, but these guys touch on stuff I've never heard before and have a ton of experience and real world experience in dealing with it. So make sure you grab Exit Right. Let's follow on social as well. Try to coordinate the release of this with these guys on the release of their course. And that way you can get in and access the course that they're having to take a deeper dive as well. Make sure you get Exit Right. Make sure you check them out on social as well. I promise you, you are not going to regret it. It's going to help in the end, potentially make you hundreds of thousands to even millions or tens of millions of dollars plus upon exit, and make it better transaction for everybody, including you as the seller, the potential buyer, and your team members, as well as your employees as well. So make sure you get Exit Right today. Thanks